We humans have built a lot of monuments over the ages, picking up tools and altering terrains to memorialize things that matter to us most. Yet, the purpose of each one isn't always so obvious. For their earliest builders left behind no writings, leaving it up to archaeology to decipher clues carved into earth and stone.
One of the really interesting things about Neolithic monuments is that these people were looking up to the skies and they were looking down to the ground, and all of these monuments to them represented all of that, the flux of everything, the sky, the soil, the landscape around them.
Dr. Jim Leary is an archaeologist and prehistorian who's fascinated by the movements of ancient people and how they built their lives during Britain's Stone Age.
To give you a bit of a timeline, we have the Paleolithic, which continues right up to about 12,000 years ago. Then we have the Mesolithic, hunter-gatherers, and people just like us, Homo sapiens. And then we get the Neolithic, the New Stone Age.
Not to be confused with the so-called modern Stone Age of old cartoons. I mean, dinosaurs? Really?
The Neolithic is the point where we first adopted agriculture and domesticated animals.
It's also when we started to put down roots, building some of our first cities and monuments. But this cultural transition, called the Neolithic Revolution, didn't happen overnight.
It's not this sort of single march of progress where people adopt a farming way of life and, well, hey, that's it, they're farmers all of a sudden. Actually, there's very little evidence that that happened.
And the hay hay is in the barn.
And one reason may be that farming was just plain exhausting.
It's much better being a hunter-gatherer. Why we gave up that way of life, I don't know. Health goes down when you start farming. Your time goes down. Farming is much more intensive.
So becoming lean, mean, settled-down farming machines didn't exactly come easy. And archaeologists often debate whether the transition was marked by crop failures, possibly due to climate change.
You know, it's very, very patchy, and there seems to be periods in the Neolithic where a farming way of life collapses almost altogether, and people become much more nomadic pastoralists.
Meaning they often traveled with their herds to greener pastures. But slowly, the farming way of life did take hold, spreading via migration over several millennia.
There's clear evidence that the idea of farming and domesticated species emerges out of what we call the Fertile Crescent, the Near East, essentially modern-day Turkey and Western Asia.
Where you'll find early settlements and sites like Göbekli Tepe, a megalithic complex 6,000 years older than Stonehenge.
Then you can see it taking multiple paths across Europe, across the Mediterranean, and stops for a while before then going over into what we call the British Isles now.
In fact, analyzing skeletal remains from archaeological sites has helped confirm this.
Archaeogeneticists are doing things with the ancient DNA from the Neolithic and quite clearly showing that the earliest Neolithic coming across into Britain are a completely different ancestral history to the indigenous existing Mesolithic hunter-gatherers.
And genetics weren't the only things changing. So was technology.
We do see, from the beginning of the Neolithic, a very different tool set to the preceding Mesolithic. The Mesolithic toolkit is an interesting one. It's made up of microliths, largely.
Very small blades that are highly versatile in their uses.
You could use these little tiny pointy bits of flint to go around the end of an arrow, for example, and then the arrow itself becomes quite a lethal weapon. It would go straight through a wild boar and come out the other side. So quite an effective weapon.
The Neolithic toolkit, on the other hand, was more suited to agrarian lifestyles. They polished stone to make adzes for woodwork, sickle blades for harvesting crops, querns for grinding grains, leaf-shaped arrows for hunting and combat, and the list goes on and on. But it's some of the axes that may have become status symbols, not just for your everyday farmers.
We know that we have certain symbols of power in the Neolithic, things like jade axes coming from the Italian Alps. So much work has gone into producing these really aesthetic, beautiful items. Objects that have moved a long way tend to take on a certain power. I mean, they must have been so sacred in the Neolithic.
Which may be why these rare axes are sometimes found buried in places of honor, like grand tomb monuments.
You know, that gives us a sense that there's this hierarchy and that there is an elite. But who that elite was and how it functioned, we probably will never actually know. Breaks my heart to say so.
Though there are more clues to how these societies live, hidden within many monuments of different shapes and sizes.
Early on, we have these causewayed enclosures, which are sometimes these vast enclosures with interrupted ditches. Sometimes we have long barrows, houses for the dead. And then as we go into the middle Neolithic, we start seeing these monuments change, and we get, for example, cursus monuments, which are seriously weird monuments. These are great big long linear things. Some of them go on for like 10 kilometers right across the landscape.
But it's later in the Neolithic that some of the most intriguing and iconic monuments emerge.
Then we start seeing a real explosion again in monument construction, henge monuments, or timber circles and stone circles.
And it's hard not to see that the natural landscape and sky influence their design.
Many monuments are actually aligned on solar and lunar points in the years. Winter solstice and the summer solstice, we know the equinoxes are important.
Because tracking celestial events could have been key to growing an agricultural community and honoring the passage of time.
They are clearly ritual, religious, ceremonial sites, and I think that people are probably travelling to them from quite some distance and depositing what they see as sacred artifacts. So I see henges and timber circles and stone circles as pilgrimage sites. So they build monuments because that's who they are.
Eventually, time went on. The Stone Age gave way to bronze, our cities and populations changed, as did our way of life. But our Neolithic ancestors' marks on the world remain, leaving us physical reminders of how they once saw it.
Monuments are, in a sense, embellishments of the world around them. They're not actually something that's constructed in, someone's head or on blueprint and then transposed onto the ground. They are part of the world and they emanate out of them.